strike him the same way he struck you. And they were actually on the way, and this woman was going to get her qisas. She was going to hit her husband in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ because he was fair in everything. And he felt that was fair. And he said, أَرَدْتُ شَيْئًا وَأَرَادَ اللَّهُ شَيْئًا. I wanted something, this has to be fair in his understanding of it, and Allah wanted something. And what Allah wants, we accept. And it was revealed this verse. In other words, don't humiliate these men, because they have already done so much to transform themselves. Don't forget, they're Arabs. These are men. They're Arabs. They're proud. And if you humiliate them in this way, you're going to lose them. I mean, this was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala understanding the psychology of the people that this message was given to as the first people. And that is why Ibn Ashur says this ayah relates to adats. It is a verse that relates to the nature of the people, their habitual nature. I just want to end with what Ibn Ashur says, because I really feel it's just so important. He says, after a long, extensive investigation of this verse, he says, it is prohibited to abandon a woman or to strike a woman because one thinks she's going to do something wrong. In other words, something has to have happened. It needs to be a gross breach of a marital contract. And this is why Muslim men have to know the rights and responsibilities of marriage. Really, they have to know them. You're supposed to know them before you get married. A lot of men have never studied them. Women have to study them as well. You have to know your rights. In my school, which is the school of the people of Medina, a woman has a right to stipulate in her contract, I don't want a second wife. And if a man takes a second wife, which is still halal for him to do, if he does, she can divorce herself. That's it. She says, I'm gone. And that is a right of a woman to do that. Women have to know their rights in order to protect themselves. And men should honor that. So what he says is, as for striking, this is a very dangerous matter. He says, فَهُوَ خَطِيرٌ وَتَحْدِيدُهُ عَسِيرٌ. And really defining this is very difficult to examine this. And then he says, وَلَكِنَّهُ أُذِنَ فِيهِ فِي حَالَةِ ظُهُورِ الْفَسَادِ. It is permitted in situations where fasad is clearly manifest. In other words, you've got a very dangerous situation. لأن المرأة ارتدت حينئذ. She has gone into an aggressive behavior. There's i'tida. She is really in a state of aggression against her husband. But he says it must be defined exactly what the limit is, and the limit that defines it is fiqh. Because in the rules of Sharia, if we allow men to take into their hands the ability to relieve their anger through physical violence, then many terrible things will emerge in the society. And this is why he says that it is not, the Sharia never gives the individual the right to take a punishment. It's the right of the authority of the land. And this is why he says, in the Sharia, لا أحد يقضي أحد بأن يقضي أحد لنفسه لا الشريعة لا تسمح بأن يقضي أحد لنفسه لولا الضرورة, unless it's absolutely necessary. And then he said, but الجمهور قيدوا ذلك بالسلامة من الإضرار. The ulama have limited this ayah in saying that it is only permitted if there's no harm that comes from it. That means that physical violence is prohibited. You cannot harm a person. One of the things I heard one man, when I was talking about this, he said, Ya akhi, it's a hadith. And it's true, there's a hadith, and it's in Imam Abu Dawood radiyallahu anhu, and he says, لا يسأل الرجل فيما ضرب امرأته. A man is not asked why he strikes his wife. And I've heard men use that verse as like, look, this is my business. Read the commentary of our ulama. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, لا يسأل تحرجا وتأثما. He's not asked about it as a way of exposing faults. In other words, you don't say to somebody in a gathering, hey, by the way, why are you beating up your wife? You know, in other words, you don't embarrass people about these things, because people who work in this thing know these are deeply sensitive issues that deal with people's honor, their name, and there's a lot of shame involved in these issues. And you can really destroy people by shaming them in these ways. And that's why this is a matter that is dealt with in some official capacity. The other thing that he says, though, is that if domestic violence begins to emerge in a society, it is permissible. يجوز لولاة الأمور إذا علموا أن الأزواج لا يحسنون وضع العقوبات الشرعية مواضعها ولا الوقوف عند حدودها أن يضربوا على أيديهم استعمال هذه العقوبة. It is permissible to prohibit any physical striking of a woman in a society where men do not know the limits of Sharia and there's harm involved. And I would say we're in that situation. And I think that Muslims, we need to very seriously address this issue. And I think we have to understand domestic violence is haram. It is haram. And a woman has a right to be safe in her home. You cannot say, if the whole point of the home is maskan, it's maskan, that Allah put sakina. That's why litaskunu ilayha, that you get sakina. And Allah put between them mawadda and rahmah, that you cannot say that the home is a place where any woman should have fear. It is haram to put any woman or child into a state of fear. It is haram. And people need to be taken to account for it. And I hope, inshallah, that's been beneficial.